Hey guys, welcome to Fun with Fallen Flags, episode 10, the route of the Denver Rio Grande Western from Marshall Pass down into Sargents, along some of the places west of Sargents, down into Blue Mesa Reservoir, which is where the track actually got submerged when they built the dam. So some of that track you can't follow unless you have a scuba set. And then it goes west down into Montrose, Colorado, south from Montrose down into Ridgeway, and then down into Ouray. So it actually terminates in Ouray because it couldn't go any further south. The canyon was just way too steep. The box canyon that's there, the grade that would have to be put in if it was able to be extended in that direction south from Ouray, it would be able to go down into Silverton. So essentially, this is going to cover that span, which is the route that I took this last weekend. So you're going to see a lot of fall foliage colors, which I want to focus on that. If somebody is going to model the autumn colors, then you can see what it actually looks like when you have a lot of really vibrant color in the aspens and how that contrasts with the pine that's on the same slopes and intermixed. So it's actually very pretty, but there's also a lot of railroad stuff that we're going to do. So along the route there was a museum in Gunnison, which if you're in the area you really need to go and set some time aside because I barely scratched the surface when I was there. So anyway, we'll get to that, but let's go ahead and get started with Marshall Pass first. Alright, this is Marshall Pass. It's essentially headed towards Sargent on the left side, but you can see by the path, which does go over some pretty steep inclines, is the reason for all of the squiggly lines on here. It's pretty rough terrain. When you are on it in the fall, you do appreciate some of the fall foliage, and you can see all the different colors of green and the aspens. They're all mixed together. As you go up over Monarch Pass, which is much straighter, well, somewhat straighter, you have the opportunity to view some mines that are in the area, and some of these are not that old, but definitely a lot of material for modeling if you were to look at it in that vein. As you see the foliage in some of these, they are almost an orange bordering on red in some of these cases. A lot of the terrain is pretty rugged, and there's a lot of pine, but the aspens seem to be just scattered randomly through it. What you'll notice is that every single aspen that you look at is a slightly different shade based on how cool it was or whatever, so you want to take that into consideration when you're modeling. Once you get down out of Marshall Pass, you get into Sargents. This is a picture of Sargents back in the 50s, and it was basically shut down in the mid-50s. So this picture here is Sargents Depot and water tank. If you go to Sargents now, you won't see that water tank. You'll see this water tank. This water tank came from up on the Marshall Pass because a lot of this stuff was dismantled as they came across and ripped up the tracks. If you go to Sargents today, you'll also see this building. This is the kitchen, the eating building for the crews. It still exists in town, but the depot does not exist. The depot is actually moved to Gunnison to the museum. Also at Sargents, there's a section house and a maintenance of way, probably a crew car, sleeping car, that is in town. I think there was a small tool shed. That was about it for the railroad related stuff. There was an old schoolhouse that was which was on the National Register as well. Even though they've lost some of the railroad heritage, it's still a cool town to go visit. So after driving west from Sargents, we headed and checked out some more aspens, and you'll notice all the variations in the colors and the trees and the placement. A lot of that has to do with the temperature, how much moisture they've gotten, sun, etc. Even within the trees clumped together, you can see there's a lot of variation. Oranges and reds and a little bit of light green. You know, take that into consideration when you're modeling the fall foliage, especially in Colorado. We've got some really good examples here of the things that, you know, we encountered as we were heading west. And even as we went west, we saw a lot of trees that didn't have any foliage at all. It dropped all their leaves, and other ones were really vibrant. So it kind of depends on where you're going. This is one of the best places that we stopped and got some good color. I lost my car here because I couldn't find it in all the trees. It kind of blended in. Oh, there it is. Now I see it. Okay. So after that, we headed back to Nope, we went to Gunnison. So to be confusing, this is the Sargent Depot that's in Gunnison. This depot was moved, and I believe in the 70s, and it was moved to the Gunnison Pioneer Museum. They've got quite a bit of stuff there, a lot of buildings. It's actually really amazing. Water tower, they've got engine and narrow gauge cars, they've got a lot of automobiles, they've got mining equipment, farming equipment, what it was like to live in the, you know, turn of the century, late 1800s. So it's definitely worth a stop. So there's a covered train display for engine 260A to C16. 16 is 16,000 tractive pounds of effort. It's also got a flanger behind it, a gondola, boxcar, double-decker, stock car, and caboose. So the engine is painted in bumblebee orange, and you can see it was dolled up for the Chicago Railroad Fair. And you can see that the engine has been repainted in that same color, not boring, drab, greasy engine black. So you can see the wheels on the bottom, and in the center two drivers don't have flanges on them because the engine was actually made to go around 30-degree curves. So those drivers kind of float, kind of move back and forth on the rail, allows them a little leeway, but the other drivers have flanges on them that keep it actually on the rails. So the flanger, I actually have a kit that I just picked up. That'll be probably one of my next project videos. The Flying Grand logo on the boxcar. The stock car is a double-decker. It has a floor that runs down the center about halfway high. If you pull that out, then 5763D wouldn't be a double-decker anymore. That's how they used to convert them into cattle or goat. This is a sleeper car, which is a little rough. It's had a hard life, needs some restoration. The caboose, however, looks like it's in pretty good shape. Matter of fact, the interior of the caboose looks like they literally just walked out of the caboose. You can see there's some normal wear and tear. It hasn't been prettied up or anything. At the museum, there's two auto barns that they have, and I didn't count them, but they said there was over 80 cars, and you can see by some of these vehicles that there's some really amazing vehicles that are on site. I saw all kinds of stuff, anywhere from Volkswagen Bugs all the way back to a postal truck from 1910 or so. So anyway, the museum's definitely worth a stop. You go through Gunnison, check it out. I was there and I didn't spend nearly enough time The Sargent Depot is on site, so check it out. So you see the gray area from the water line that moves up. That's how far down Blue Mesa Reservoir is. You can see that there's definitely a drought. That being said, there's still a little bit of foliage around, but there's a lot of scrub brush around this reservoir. As you start to move out towards Montrose, the vegetation gets thin. You get real high plains type of vegetation. Not a lot of pine trees, not a lot of aspens. You definitely notice the difference. And once you start getting out of Montrose and heading south to Ridgeway and then to Ouray, you notice there's a box canyon. It's a little more protected. You start getting some of the pine trees back and some of the fall color again. So Ouray is a cool town. It's got some older buildings like this livery. It's got some newer buildings, some hotels, and it's got awesome hot springs. Bring your swim trunks if you're going to go there. Heading south out of Ouray, I didn't go that way. That was for another trip. I've gone that way. You end up in Silverton and then in Durango. Once you end up down there, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump down to Chama. So definitely a lot of photo opportunities if you go that direction. But Ouray's one of my favorite towns. It's in a box canyon. It's difficult to get out of, which explains why they didn't put the railroad from down to Silverton from Ouray. So anyway, it's a good trip, and I enjoyed it. We had a great time. All right, that's going to do it for this week. Fun with fallen flags. Autumn colors along the Denver and Rio Grande Western from Sargents to Ouray. So get a map out if it didn't make a lot of sense. You can kind of follow along, but essentially the fall colors, not uniform. There's a lot of variation, and depending on if it's along a river, up high on a mountain, down in a gully, how much rainfall they've gotten, how much of a cold snap they've got, if it's been mild, will determine the aspens and how they change. Aspens don't really do well down in Denver. I've had a few, and most of them die after a few years. They just don't like the lower altitudes. They're fine 8,000, 9,000 feet. Once they get too high up, then you don't see them grow or propagate anywhere. So anyway, hope that gives you some ideas on what to do for fall foliage if you're thinking about it. And there's a lot more stuff along the route if you decide to follow that route yourself. I didn't stop at Ridgeway to look at any old locations to see if anything was still around. I don't know if there's really anything that you can see. I was looking pretty intently as I was driving through, and I imagine that most of that stuff is completely gone. But at Ridgeway, you can go west from there and start heading to Telluride, and there's a whole bunch of Rio Grande Southern locations at that location. If you continue south Ouray, you can go down into Silverton, and Silverton and Durango, there's a whole bunch of stuff there, and carry on to Chama. Just keep driving. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week for episode 11. Thanks for watching, everybody.